The easiest way to discover a person's true character is to let them believe that nobody important is watching. Andrew Harrison had repeated those words to young executives for years, but on a cool Monday morning in early October, he decided it was finally time to test whether he still believed them himself. As the 38-year-old owner of Harrison Manor stepped out of an aging maintenance van parked beside the enormous service entrance, there was nothing left that suggested he was one of the wealthiest businessmen in New York. His tailored suits had been replaced by faded work pants, sturdy boots, a plain maintenance shirt with a stitched name tag reading Andrew, a worn baseball cap, and a pair of simple reading glasses that subtly changed the shape of his face. A carefully trimmed beard completed the disguise, making him look like a hard-working man who had spent decades repairing buildings instead of leading a multi-billion-dollar company. Harrison Manor overlooked the calm waters of Long Island Sound, stretching across nearly 20 acres of perfectly maintained gardens, stone walkways, towering oak trees, elegant fountains, and one of the most beautiful private residences in the state. Every polished window reflected wealth, every marble column spoke of history, and every crystal chandelier inside the mansion represented generations of success. Yet during recent months, anonymous letters from former employees had reached Andrew's private office. None complained about salaries or working conditions. Instead, they described something far more difficult to measure. They claimed kindness had quietly disappeared from the household. Respect was becoming selective. Titles mattered more than character. Rather than sending consultants or interviewing managers, Andrew chose another path. If he wanted the truth, he would have to become invisible. The security supervisor welcomed him with little interest, quickly handing him a clipboard before pointing toward the maintenance corridor. A few employees walked past without making eye contact. Others barely acknowledged his greeting. Andrew expected that reaction. He quietly pushed his maintenance card into the long hallway, pretending to study a folded floor map that he intentionally held upside down. Several employees noticed his confusion but continued walking without saying a word. One server smiled politely before disappearing into the dining room. A groundskeeper glanced toward him and kept moving. Andrew remained standing exactly where he was, waiting. Moments later, a calm voice interrupted the silence. "Excuse me, sir. I think your map is upside down." Andrew looked up and saw a woman wearing a spotless housekeeping uniform carrying neatly folded white towels. Her warm smile appeared effortless, and her gentle eyes reflected genuine concern rather than obligation. "First day?" she asked kindly. Andrew laughed softly. "Is it that obvious?" She smiled. "Only because I got lost here my first week too." Without hesitation, she turned the map in the correct direction and pointed toward the west service hallway. "The maintenance workshop is through those double doors, then down the stairs on your right. If you reach the indoor garden, you have gone too far." Andrew thanked her sincerely before beginning to push the heavy cart forward. After only a few feet, one of the front wheels became stuck against the edge of a decorative floor runner, causing the cart to tilt awkwardly. Before he could react, the woman calmly steadied the supplies with both hands and gently lifted the wheel free without spilling a single item. "These carts always catch there," she said with an understanding smile. "You are not the first person it has happened to." Andrew noticed that although several employees had witnessed the moment, only she had stopped to help. "I appreciate it," he said. "My name is Andrew." "I am Maya Robinson," she replied warmly. "Welcome to Harrison Manor." There was no curiosity about his past, no judgment about his position, and no calculation behind her kindness. She simply offered the same respect she believed every person deserved. As Maya continued toward the guest suites, greeting everyone she passed with the same sincere warmth, Andrew quietly reached into his pocket and removed a small worn leather notebook. Resting it against the handle of his maintenance cart, he wrote his first observation of the week in careful handwriting. The strongest foundation of any home is not built with stone. It is built by the first person who chooses kindness when kindness offers nothing in return. Closing the notebook, Andrew looked down the endless hallway where Maya had disappeared around the corner, and for the first time since beginning his experiment, he wondered whether the future of Harrison Manor might depend less on the people giving orders and far more on the quiet woman carrying fresh towels through its silent halls. Andrew Harrison spent the remainder of his first morning moving quietly through Harrison Manor with a wrench in one hand and his small leather notebook safely tucked inside his maintenance jacket. The mansion awakened with a rhythm that few visitors ever witnessed. Housekeepers refreshed luxurious guest suites. Chefs prepared breakfast in the expansive kitchen. Gardeners carefully trimmed flower beds overlooking Long Island Sound, and servers polished crystal glasses until they sparkled beneath the morning sunlight. Everyone appeared busy, yet Andrew quickly noticed that efficiency and kindness were not always the same thing. Some employees greeted only supervisors while walking past co-workers without acknowledgement. Others offered cheerful smiles whenever senior managers entered the room, only to become distant moments later. Andrew repaired a loose cabinet hinge in one hallway before deliberately leaving a small toolbox near the entrance to the library. He remained close enough to observe without attracting attention. Several employees stepped around the toolbox as though it had become invisible. One man even nudged it aside with his shoe before continuing down the corridor. A few minutes later, Maya Robinson arrived carrying fresh linens for the nearby guest rooms. She immediately noticed the misplaced tools, lifted the heavy box with both hands, and placed it safely beside the wall where no one could trip over it. Looking around the hallway, she quietly asked, "Andrew, were you looking for these?" He stepped forward with a grateful smile. "I was wondering where they disappeared." Maya laughed softly. Tools have a way of wandering around big houses. She handed him the box before wishing him a productive morning and continuing toward the guest wing. There had been no expectation of praise and no audience watching her thoughtful gesture. It was simply another ordinary decision that revealed extraordinary character. Later that afternoon, Andrew entered the bustling kitchen where preparations had already begun for a private luncheon scheduled the following day. One of the younger assistants accidentally dropped an entire tray of freshly washed silverware onto the tile floor. The sharp clatter echoed throughout the room, and the young employee froze with obvious embarrassment. Several co-workers sighed with frustration, while another shook his head impatiently. Before anyone could criticize the mistake, Maya quietly knelt beside the assistant and began collecting the scattered utensils. "Everyone has a first difficult day," she said gently. "The important part is making sure the second one is better." Within moments, 2 additional employees joined her, and what could have become an uncomfortable scene quietly transformed into teamwork. Standing near the pantry doorway while pretending to inspect a leaking faucet, Andrew watched every detail unfold. No supervisor had instructed Maya to help. No reward awaited her. She simply chose compassion because it reflected who she was rather than what the situation required. Throughout the afternoon, Andrew intentionally created several harmless opportunities to observe the household. He asked a server for directions, even though he already knew the route. He carried a heavy ladder through the service corridor without requesting assistance. He paused outside the laundry room while studying another floor plan. Most people remained focused on their own responsibilities, yet Maya consistently noticed the small moments others overlooked. She pointed him toward the correct hallway, steadied the ladder before it brushed against a doorway, and reminded him where replacement light bulbs were stored after hearing another employee mention them earlier. As the workday slowly came to an end, Andrew stepped outside into the peaceful courtyard where the evening sun reflected across the fountains and carefully maintained gardens. Removing the worn notebook from his pocket, he thoughtfully added another observation beneath the first. Character is revealed most clearly through the smallest choices, especially when no applause is expected. Closing the notebook, he looked back toward the mansion where Maya was helping an elderly florist carry several empty boxes to a delivery van before returning inside with the same quiet smile she had worn since sunrise. Andrew realized that his experiment was beginning to uncover something far more valuable than operational problems. Hidden among the polished marble, elegant architecture, and extraordinary wealth was a woman whose kindness seemed completely untouched by the status of the people standing before her. And for the first time, he began to wonder whether one truly compassionate person could quietly transform an entire household without ever realizing it. By the third morning, Andrew no longer needed to invent reasons to remain unnoticed because the household had already accepted him as just another maintenance worker. The novelty of his arrival had disappeared, leaving him free to observe the invisible patterns that shaped daily life inside Harrison Manor. He quietly repaired a loose handrail near the grand staircase before replacing a flickering light fixture in the west corridor, greeting everyone with the same calm courtesy regardless of whether they acknowledged him. Some returned a polite smile. Others continued walking as though he were part of the furniture. None of it surprised him. What did surprise him was how consistently Maya Robinson treated every encounter as though the person standing before her mattered. Shortly before lunch, the estate manager, Richard Collins, entered the service hallway with the brisk confidence of a man accustomed to unquestioned authority. His polished shoes echoed across the marble floor as employees instinctively stepped aside. Richard paused when he noticed Andrew organizing supplies outside the maintenance room. His eyes narrowed for a brief moment before he spoke. "You are the new maintenance employee." Andrew nodded respectfully. "Yes, sir." Richard glanced over the organized toolbox with little interest. "I hope you understand that Harrison Manor has very high standards. Mistakes are remembered here." Without waiting for a reply, he continued down the hallway, offering warm greetings only to department supervisors while ignoring everyone else. Andrew watched silently until Richard disappeared around the corner. Moments later, Maya arrived carrying fresh flowers for the library. She noticed Andrew standing thoughtfully beside his cart. "Everything all right?" she asked. Andrew offered a small smile. "Just learning how things work around here." Maya adjusted the arrangement of white lilies before answering with quiet honesty. "Every workplace has people who lead with encouragement and people who lead with fear. You cannot always choose who manages you, but you can choose the kind of person you become." Her words lingered with Andrew long after she continued toward the reading room. That afternoon, he decided to deepen the experiment. While replacing air filters near the guest wing, he casually mentioned to Maya that finding steady work had not always been easy for him. He explained that he had spent years moving from one temporary job to another after a family business closed unexpectedly, and that this position felt like an opportunity to begin again. None of the details revealed his true identity, yet the story contained enough truth to sound believable. Maya listened without interrupting. There was no trace of curiosity driven by gossip, only sincere attention. When he finished, she smiled gently. "Life has a way of surprising people. Sometimes the hardest seasons teach us things success never could. Do not let yesterday decide who you become tomorrow." Andrew thanked her quietly, realizing that she had offered encouragement without asking for evidence, without questioning his worth, and without measuring him by his job title. Later that day, Richard crossed paths with them again while inspecting preparations for an upcoming charity gala. Seeing Maya speaking with the maintenance worker, he frowned slightly. "Miss Robinson, I trust your schedule is not so light that conversations have become your priority." Maya remained composed. "I had already completed the guest suites, sir." Andrew had a question about the storage rooms. Richard barely acknowledged Andrew before replying. "The maintenance staff should focus on maintenance. Efficiency is expected from everyone." He walked away before either of them could respond. Andrew noticed that several nearby employees lowered their eyes, unwilling to become involved. Maya simply picked up the flower arrangement and smiled with quiet confidence. "Do not worry," she said softly. "Respect given freely lasts much longer than respect demanded." As evening settled over the estate, Andrew returned alone to the quiet maintenance workshop. He removed the familiar leather notebook from his jacket and slowly wrote another observation beneath the previous entries. Titles may command attention, but character quietly earns trust. Closing the notebook, he reflected on everything he had witnessed during the past 3 days. His original plan had been to uncover weaknesses in the operation of Harrison Manor, yet each passing hour revealed something far more meaningful. Hidden beneath routines, schedules, and polished appearances was a woman whose quiet compassion remained unchanged no matter who stood before her, while others seemed to measure every interaction according to status alone. Andrew knew the experiment was becoming more complicated than he had anticipated, because the deeper he looked, the more difficult it became to separate professional evaluation from personal admiration for the extraordinary dignity Maya carried into every ordinary moment. The following Saturday arrived with unusually clear skies, and Harrison Manor stood almost silent after a demanding week of preparations for the upcoming charity gala. Only a small maintenance crew remained on duty, giving Andrew the perfect opportunity to quietly leave the estate without attracting attention. He wanted to answer one question that had slowly become impossible to ignore. Was Maya Robinson simply kind while she was at work, or was kindness the foundation of her entire life? Keeping a respectful distance, Andrew followed as Maya finished her shift shortly after noon. She drove an aging sedan through quiet neighborhoods until she stopped at a modest brick house lined with colorful flower pots and a carefully swept front porch. There were no expensive decorations, no signs of luxury, only the unmistakable feeling that someone cared deeply for every small detail. Andrew parked farther down the street, where he would remain unnoticed. From a distance, he watched Maya carry several grocery bags inside before returning moments later with an elderly woman whose silver hair reflected brightly beneath the afternoon sun. Maya walked slowly beside her, matching every step with patient care as they made their way through a small vegetable garden behind the house. They laughed together while picking tomatoes and fresh herbs, and although Andrew could not hear every word, he recognized something that money could never purchase. He recognized peace. After nearly an hour, Maya hugged the older woman before driving across town to a neighborhood community center. Curious, Andrew entered a nearby coffee shop where he could observe without interrupting. Through the large front windows, he saw children gathering around folding tables covered with books, crayons, and notebooks. Maya greeted each child by name before helping them with reading assignments and school projects. When one little boy became frustrated while solving a homework problem, she knelt beside him with endless patience until his worried expression slowly transformed into a proud smile. There were no cameras documenting the moment, no social media posts celebrating volunteer work, and no wealthy donors applauding her generosity. She simply gave away her Saturday because she believed every child deserved encouragement. As evening approached, Andrew left the coffee shop and walked toward a nearby park where he hoped to clear his thoughts before returning to the estate. Sitting alone on a weathered wooden bench, he opened the familiar leather notebook and quietly reread the observations he had written throughout the week. Every page pointed toward the same conclusion. Maya never changed her character according to the importance of the person standing before her. Whether speaking to a maintenance worker, an elderly family member, a frightened child, or a senior executive, her voice carried the same warmth and respect. Andrew had spent years interviewing executives who claimed integrity during carefully rehearsed meetings. Yet this woman demonstrated integrity through ordinary moments that no one else ever noticed. As the sun slowly dipped below the trees, Andrew heard footsteps approaching. Looking up, he realized Maya had entered the park carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. She paused with mild surprise before smiling. "Andrew, I did not expect to see you here." He returned the smile. "I could say the same thing." She laughed softly and held up one of the cups. "I always stop here before driving home. They accidentally made an extra coffee, and I was wondering if someone might enjoy it." She handed him the warm cup without hesitation and sat on the opposite end of the bench, leaving a comfortable distance between them. They spoke for several quiet minutes about changing seasons, beautiful sunsets over Long Island Sound, and the simple satisfaction of honest work completed well. Maya never asked personal questions or offered unwanted advice. Instead, she listened carefully whenever Andrew spoke, making him feel seen without making him feel examined. As they stood to leave, she smiled and said, "Some people spend their whole lives searching for extraordinary opportunities to make a difference. I think the ordinary ones appear every single day if we are paying attention." Andrew watched her walk toward her car as those words echoed in his mind. Returning to his own vehicle, he opened the leather notebook once more and slowly added another sentence beneath the previous entries. True greatness rarely announces itself. More often, it quietly reveals itself through ordinary acts of kindness repeated day after day until they become the unmistakable measure of a remarkable life. Monday morning arrived with an unusual energy as Harrison Manor entered the final stage of preparation for its annual charity gala. Delivery trucks rolled through the front gates carrying fresh flowers, elegant table settings, and carefully selected decorations while staff members moved through the estate with greater urgency than usual. Andrew resumed his role as the quiet maintenance worker, replacing a damaged light fixture near the ballroom before checking electrical connections along the grand staircase. From every direction, he observed the same pattern he had quietly documented throughout the previous week. Pressure revealed character far more clearly than comfort ever could. Some employees encouraged one another despite the demanding schedule, while others allowed stress to replace patience. Richard Collins seemed determined to make every conversation feel like an inspection rather than an opportunity to lead. His voice echoed through the hallways as he reminded department heads that the evening must be flawless because influential guests from across New York would soon arrive. Shortly before noon, a shipment of decorative centerpieces reached the ballroom. While several employees carefully unpacked crystal vases, one delivery cart rolled across a slightly uneven section of the marble floor. A single arrangement leaned sideways, causing water to spill across the polished surface. The flowers themselves remained unharmed, and the vase did not break, yet the unexpected delay immediately attracted Richard's attention. He crossed the ballroom with visible frustration and looked around for someone to blame. His eyes settled first on Andrew, who happened to be adjusting a decorative wall sconce nearby, and then on Maya, who had stepped forward with clean towels to prevent anyone from slipping on the water. "This should never have happened," Richard declared firmly. Attention to detail separates professionals from amateurs. Several employees fell silent. No one argued. No one explained that the floor had shifted slightly beneath the heavy cart. Andrew knew exactly what had occurred because he had noticed the uneven marble earlier that morning and had already scheduled a repair after the event. Before he could speak, Maya calmly addressed Richard with complete respect. "The spill has already been contained, sir. We will have everything ready long before the guests arrive." Richard folded his arms. "That is not the point, Miss Robinson. Problems should be prevented, not corrected after they appear." Andrew could have accepted responsibility immediately, but he hesitated for only a moment. He wanted to see what everyone else would choose when faced with an uncomfortable situation. Maya glanced briefly toward him before returning her attention to Richard. "If additional responsibility is necessary, I was supervising this section of the ballroom. Please allow me to make certain everything is completed exactly as expected." Her words surprised Andrew because she had not caused the accident, yet she willingly accepted accountability to protect the team from unnecessary embarrassment. Richard studied her for several seconds before responding. "See that it does not happen again." Without another word, he turned and continued toward the entrance hall, already issuing instructions to another department. The ballroom remained quiet until he disappeared from view. Almost immediately, employees resumed working together. One person refilled the vase while another polished the marble floor. Within minutes, there was no visible evidence that anything had interrupted the preparations. Maya smiled encouragingly at the younger employees who still looked nervous. "Everything is all right," she said gently. "The important thing is that we solved the problem together." Later that afternoon, Andrew walked alone through the peaceful East Garden where the fountain reflected the soft autumn sunlight. He removed the familiar leather notebook and carefully wrote another observation beneath the previous entries. The strongest leaders do not search for someone to blame when difficulties appear. They quietly become the steady presence that allows everyone else to rise. He closed the notebook slowly, looking back toward the magnificent estate with a deeper understanding than he had expected to find. His original experiment had almost reached its conclusion, and the evidence before him had become impossible to ignore. Maya had protected a co-worker without expecting recognition, preserved another person's dignity under public pressure, and restored calm where fear could easily have taken control. Standing beneath the tall oak trees overlooking Long Island Sound, Andrew quietly made the decision that the meeting already scheduled for the following morning would become far more important than anyone inside Harrison Manor could possibly imagine. The charity gala concluded with flawless elegance, and by the time the final guests departed shortly before midnight, Harrison Manor once again settled into peaceful silence. Crystal chandeliers continued to glow above the empty ballroom, while the housekeeping staff quietly restored every room to its usual perfection. Andrew spent the final hours of the evening helping fold banquet tables and store equipment beside employees who still believe he was nothing more than the newest member of the maintenance department. Although exhausted, he paid close attention to the conversations unfolding around him. Some employees proudly reflected on the success of the event. Others worried whether Richard Collins would discover even the smallest imperfection once his final inspection began. Maya Robinson remained exactly as she had been since Andrew first met her, thanking coworkers for their effort, offering encouragement to those who looked tired, and reminding everyone to drive home safely after a long day. Long after midnight, the estate finally grew quiet enough that only the distant sound of the fountain echoed across the courtyard. Andrew returned alone to the small maintenance workshop, removed the worn baseball cap that had become part of his disguise, and sat at the wooden workbench beneath a single overhead light. For several silent minutes, he slowly turned the pages of the leather notebook that had accompanied him throughout the entire experiment. Every observation led toward the same undeniable conclusion. He had entered Harrison Manor searching for weaknesses in procedures and management, but what he had truly discovered was the immeasurable value of quiet integrity. He carefully wrote one final note beneath the others. An organization will never become greater than the character it chooses to recognize and reward. Closing the notebook, Andrew reached into his pocket and took out his personal telephone, a device he had intentionally avoided using while living as an ordinary employee. He placed a single call. Within moments, his longtime attorney, Benjamin Foster, answered. Andrew calmly instructed him to arrive at Harrison Manor at 9 o'clock the following morning, carrying several confidential personnel files and official company documents. Benjamin asked no unnecessary questions. After working beside Andrew for many years, he immediately recognized the calm certainty in his employer's voice. When the call ended, Andrew contacted his executive assistant and requested that every employee, regardless of department or seniority, attend a mandatory staff meeting in the grand ballroom the next morning. The invitation contained no explanation beyond the words attendance required. Before leaving the workshop, Andrew carefully folded the maintenance uniform that had become strangely meaningful to him. Looking at the simple shirt resting on the bench, he realized it had allowed him to experience his own home from an entirely different perspective. Wealth had opened countless doors throughout his life, but anonymity had opened his eyes. Early the following morning, whispers spread quietly through every corridor of Harrison Manor. Employees exchanged uncertain glances while preparing for the unexpected meeting. Some assumed the gathering concerned the successful gala. Others worried that budget reductions or staffing changes might be announced. Richard Collins appeared especially confident, walking through the mansion with the composed expression of someone expecting recognition for another perfectly managed event. Maya, however, seemed far less concerned about titles or announcements than about making certain the ballroom looked welcoming before everyone arrived. She arranged fresh flowers near the entrance, straightened several chairs that had shifted slightly overnight, and greeted each arriving coworker with the same warm smile she offered every morning. Passing Andrew near the service hallway, she noticed that he seemed unusually thoughtful. "You look like you hardly slept," she said kindly. Andrew smiled. "I suppose today feels important." Maya nodded gently. "Sometimes the days we cannot predict become the ones we remember the longest." Her words lingered in Andrew's mind as they walked toward the ballroom from opposite directions. One carried a folder containing years of carefully documented observations. The other carried nothing more than quiet humility and another ordinary willingness to serve. Neither of them knew exactly how every life inside Harrison Manor would change over the next hour, but Andrew understood one thing with complete certainty. The time for silent observation had ended, and the time for truth had finally arrived. Employees filled the grand ballroom with quiet curiosity as the clock approached 9 in the morning. Department heads stood near the front while housekeepers, servers, gardeners, maintenance workers, and kitchen staff gathered in neat rows beneath the towering crystal chandeliers. Soft sunlight streamed through the tall windows overlooking Long Island Sound, casting long reflections across the polished marble floor. Conversations remained hushed because no one understood why every employee had been summoned with such urgency. Richard Collins stood confidently beside the stage, convinced the meeting would celebrate another successful charity gala. Maya Robinson quietly greeted co-workers as they arrived before taking a place near the middle of the room, her posture calm and composed as always. Everyone noticed that Andrew had not yet appeared with the maintenance team, and several assumed he had been assigned another repair somewhere else on the estate. A few moments later, the ballroom doors slowly opened. Andrew walked inside wearing the same maintenance uniform that everyone had seen throughout the previous week. His cart was nowhere in sight. Instead, he carried only a familiar leather notebook in one hand. Richard frowned immediately. "This meeting is for staff," he said firmly. "Maintenance can wait until afterward." Andrew offered no reply. He simply continued walking toward the front of the ballroom with quiet confidence. Several employees exchanged confused glances, wondering why the newest maintenance worker seemed completely unbothered by the interruption. Richard stepped forward again, preparing to stop him, but before another word could be spoken, the main entrance opened once more. Benjamin Foster, dressed in a tailored navy suit, entered alongside two senior executives from Harrison Holdings carrying neatly organized folders. Every conversation in the ballroom stopped instantly. Richard looked surprised as Benjamin walked directly past him without hesitation and approached Andrew instead. Standing before the entire staff, Benjamin smiled respectfully before saying in a clear voice, "Good morning, Mr. Harrison. Everything is ready." The room became completely silent. Richard stared in disbelief while several employees instinctively looked back and forth between the maintenance worker and the distinguished attorney. Andrew slowly removed his worn baseball cap and reading glasses before placing them beside the leather notebook on a nearby table. Without the disguise, his familiar features became unmistakable. The quiet maintenance employee they had worked beside all week was, in fact, Andrew Harrison, owner of Harrison Manor and founder of Harrison Holdings. Audible gasps spread across the ballroom. One server covered her mouth in surprise. A groundskeeper lowered his head in disbelief. Richard took an uncertain step backward, searching unsuccessfully for an explanation that no longer existed. Maya remained perfectly still, her eyes widening as the truth settled in. Yet her expression held no fear, only genuine astonishment. Andrew looked across the room with calm sincerity rather than anger. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "For the past week, I have lived and worked beside you without revealing my identity. I wanted to experience this home through the eyes of someone whose title carried no influence." He lifted the worn leather notebook. "Everything I witnessed is recorded here. Not financial reports. Not performance statistics. Moments. Decisions. Conversations. The small choices people make when they believe no one important is watching." He slowly opened the notebook and began reading selected observations. He spoke about employees who quietly supported one another during difficult moments, about those who ignored people they believed held lower positions, and about simple acts of kindness that required no audience. Finally, he paused before looking toward Maya. There is one name that appears on nearly every page. Every pair of eyes turned toward her. Maya looked genuinely uncomfortable with the sudden attention, quietly lowering her gaze. Andrew smiled warmly. "From my first morning inside this house until yesterday afternoon, Maya Robinson never once changed the way she treated another human being based on status, appearance, or position. She offered guidance without being asked, accepted responsibilities she did not owe, encouraged coworkers during difficult moments, and showed the same kindness outside these walls that she showed within them. She did not know she was speaking to the owner of this estate. She believed she was simply helping another person." Andrew gently closed the notebook before continuing. "That is exactly the kind of character upon which every great organization should be built." In the profound silence that followed, the meaning of the entire week became unmistakably clear. Harrison Manor had not merely undergone an inspection. It had witnessed the quiet unveiling of truth, and no title in the room could outweigh the value of genuine integrity. The silence that followed Andrew Harrison's final words seemed to stretch across the entire ballroom. No one moved. No one whispered. Every employee stood beneath the glittering chandeliers, realizing that an ordinary week had quietly become the most important lesson of their careers. Andrew looked around the room with calm sincerity before placing the worn leather notebook beside the confidential folders Benjamin Foster had prepared. "This experiment was never intended to embarrass anyone," he said. "It was created to help me understand whether the values upon which Harrison Manor was built were still alive within these walls." He paused briefly before continuing. "Buildings can be restored. Procedures can be improved. Profit can always recover. Character is the one investment that determines whether every other success will endure." Richard Collins lowered his eyes, no longer carrying the confidence that had filled the room only minutes earlier. Andrew turned toward him with the same composed expression he had shown everyone throughout the week. "Richard, Your organizational skills and attention to detail have contributed to this estate for many years, and those efforts deserve acknowledgement. However, leadership cannot be sustained through fear alone. Respect earned through trust will always outlast authority maintained through intimidation. Benjamin stepped forward and quietly handed Richard an official envelope. Andrew continued speaking before anyone could misunderstand the moment. Effective immediately, you will conclude your responsibilities as estate manager. Human Resources will assist you with a professional transition that recognizes your years of service with fairness and dignity. Richard accepted the envelope silently. For the first time since Andrew had known him, there was no argument, no attempt to defend himself, only a thoughtful expression that suggested he understood the decision had not been made in anger, but after careful reflection. Andrew gave him a respectful nod before turning his attention toward Maya Robinson, who still appeared overwhelmed by everything unfolding around her. "Maya," he said warmly, "during the past week I watched you perform hundreds of ordinary actions that revealed extraordinary character. After reviewing your employment record, I also discovered years of outstanding performance evaluations, exceptional attendance, and consistent praise from guests and coworkers alike. None of those reports surprised me because I had already witnessed the person behind them." Maya looked genuinely humbled. "Mr. Harrison," she replied softly, "I was only doing my job." Andrew smiled. "That is exactly why this moment matters. You believe kindness was simply part of your job. I believe it is the foundation of true leadership." Benjamin opened another folder and presented a formal document. Andrew continued, "Effective today, I would like to appoint you as Director of Household Operations for Harrison Manor. This role carries greater responsibility, expanded authority, executive leadership training, and the opportunity to help shape the culture of this estate for years to come." Maya looked down at the document before lifting her eyes again. "I have never imagined a position like that," she admitted honestly. "Neither had many great leaders before someone believed in them," Andrew answered gently. After taking a quiet breath, Maya accepted the folder with both hands. "If I accept," she said, "I hope every person working here will always feel respected, whether they are welcoming guests, preparing meals, maintaining the gardens, or repairing a light fixture. Every job matters because every person matters." A quiet wave of applause began somewhere near the back of the ballroom. Within seconds, the entire staff joined together, not because they had been instructed to applaud, but because they recognized the sincerity behind her words. Andrew noticed smiles replacing uncertainty across faces that had entered the room with anxiety only an hour earlier. Looking around the ballroom one final time, he realized that the atmosphere already felt different. Nothing about the marble floors, elegant windows, or magnificent chandeliers had changed, yet the people standing beneath them had begun seeing one another through a different lens. As the meeting came to a close, Andrew quietly picked up the worn leather notebook that had guided his extraordinary journey and slipped it into the inside pocket of his tailored jacket. The experiment had officially ended, but the future of Harrison Manor was only beginning, built not upon wealth or status alone, but upon the simple truth that the strongest legacy any leader can leave behind is a culture where kindness is recognized, dignity is protected, and every person is reminded that their character carries far greater value than their title ever could. 1 year later, the first light of an autumn morning spread across Long Island Sound exactly as it had on the day Andrew Harrison quietly entered Harrison Manor wearing a maintenance uniform, yet almost everything that truly mattered inside the estate had changed. The gardens appeared even more vibrant. The historic mansion remained as elegant as ever, and guests still admired the breathtaking architecture. But the greatest transformation could not be photographed or measured. It lived in the everyday interactions between the people who called Harrison Manor their workplace. Employees greeted one another by name regardless of position. Department meetings opened with appreciation before discussing responsibilities. New staff members were paired with experienced mentors who believed that teaching was just as important as efficiency. The atmosphere no longer depended upon fear of making mistakes. Instead, it was guided by the shared belief that excellence and kindness could exist together. Andrew continued visiting every department without advance notice, although he no longer needed a disguise to understand what was happening. He regularly shared lunch with gardeners, spoke with servers preparing evening events, thanked maintenance teams after difficult repairs, and listened carefully whenever employees suggested improvements. Wealth had once allowed him to build an extraordinary estate, but humility had taught him how to build something far more valuable. Maya Robinson embraced her new responsibilities with the same quiet grace that had first captured Andrew's attention. Her office door remained open throughout the day, and anyone with a concern or an idea knew they would be welcomed with patience and respect. She introduced leadership workshops that encouraged communication rather than hierarchy, created recognition programs celebrating acts of kindness alongside professional achievements, and personally visited every department each week because she believed that no leader should become distant from the people they served. Her title had changed, but her heart had not. One crisp afternoon, while preparations were underway for another charity gathering, a newly hired maintenance employee struggled to carry several heavy supply boxes across the courtyard after one of the wheels on his equipment cart became stuck against an uneven stone walkway. Several people hurried past, focused on their own assignments. Before he could ask for assistance, another employee immediately stepped forward, lifted the front of the cart, and helped guide it safely onto level ground. "Your first week can feel overwhelming," she said with an encouraging smile. "Do not worry. We all help each other here." Standing a short distance away, Andrew recognized the familiar scene almost instantly. The words were different, and the faces were new, but the spirit behind the moment remained exactly the same. Maya happened to walk into the courtyard just as the two employees finished organizing the supplies. She smiled warmly, thanked them both, and continued toward the ballroom without realizing Andrew had witnessed the exchange. He reached into the inside pocket of his tailored jacket and removed the worn leather notebook that he still carried wherever he went. Its pages had become slightly faded with time, but every observation remained as meaningful as the day it had been written. Opening to the final blank page, he slowly added one last sentence beneath all the others. "The greatest measure of leadership is not the number of people who follow you. It is the number of people who continue choosing kindness long after they no longer need your example." Andrew gently closed the notebook and looked across Harrison Manor as employees from every department worked side by side with genuine respect. Maya paused near the entrance to greet arriving volunteers with the same warm smile she had offered a stranger carrying a maintenance cart 1 year earlier. In that quiet moment, Andrew realized his experiment had never truly been about discovering who people were when nobody important was watching. It had been about proving that one person's steady compassion could inspire countless others to become the best versions of themselves. As the evening sun reflected across Long Island Sound, and the mansion filled once again with laughter, gratitude, and hope, Harrison Manor stood as living proof that while wealth may build remarkable places, it is unwavering character, humble leadership, and everyday kindness that create a legacy capable of lasting for generations.